Hi, my name is Michael Chikeen. The smartest people I've met have one common belief, that us silly humans really don't know much. For example, we still don't know why planes stay in the air, or how Tylenol or even gravity works. Yeah, gravity. Look it up. In today's distracted, clickbait, misinformation age, I wish we could all be less certain, more humble, and a lot more curious. Admittedly, I've been known to struggle with all three. So no more, no less, this show is my attempt to be that change. Thanks for joining me, and here we go. Hey everybody, welcome back to No More, No Less. I'm Michael Chikeen, and today in the virtual studio, I have with me Dr. Bella DePaulo. There seems to be a slight panic in the air today about more people choosing to be single. Often cited as the state of Japanese sexlessness or the moral imperative of keeping the birth rate from falling through the floor, population collapse, they say. Yet no matter how much fear the media tries to stir into my coffee every morning about this manufactured problem, the trend continues of people choosing to be single. So is this a crisis or a personal choice revolution? Bella DePaulo has been described by The Atlantic as America's foremost thinker and writer on the single experience. Dr. DePaulo coined the term single at heart and gave a TEDx talk on this topic in 2017, which has more than 1.6 million views. Dr. DePaulo received her PhD from Harvard University and is currently an academic affiliate in the Department of Psychology and Brain Sciences at the University of California, Santa Barbara. She's the author of Singled Out, The Psychology of Dexter, and How We Live Now, and she's written the column Living Signal for Psychology Today since 2008 and been published in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Time Magazine, and been interviewed all over the place on TV. Today we're going to talk about her new book, Single at Heart. And so before someone else has the chance to get married, let's dive in. Bella DePaulo, welcome to the show.
Thank you. That was a wonderful introduction. And I'll just show my cover of my book now since I'm very proud of it.
Yes, for sure. I guess I want to start really at the beginning. Like, how, being in academia, how did you find the path towards this sort of subspecialty? Like, how did you find this topic to focus on?
Yeah, well, I had a whole different area of expertise for 2 decades. I used to study the psychology of lying and detecting lies. And of
Man,
course, that was interesting. There's
is that kind of like the other side? It's like the psychology of being in a marriage.
Maybe that's one way to think about it. But that was interesting. But I'm 70. I've been single my whole life. So this was more personal to me. And it started off about 3 decades ago, just noticing ways in which I thought I was treated as lesser than because I was single. So, for example, the person who arranged the course schedule for the Department of Psychology asked me to come in and teach at night because she said it would be too hard for the married faculty. And they didn't even have kids yet.
Oh my
Or,
gosh.
yeah, or my colleagues would socialize with me during the week. We'd go out to lunch, but then on the weekends, they would socialize with other couples and I wouldn't be invited. And so there was this whole series of examples like that. And it made me wonder, is it really because I'm single or they just don't like me? And it's hard to know in any individual case. So I started asking people, other single people. At this social event, I went up to this woman. I didn't know her very well, but I knew she was single. And I told her about some of my experiences. And I asked her if she ever had any experiences like that. And wow, did she. So she starts telling me. Then somebody else hears us and she joins us. And then somebody else joins and somebody else joins. And we had this circle of people and we talked the entire night at that social event. So I knew it was resonating. Then
Wow.
the next day, I woke up, turned on my email, and I had emails from some of those people saying, oh, and I just thought of another thing. So And then that same thing happened at a social event about a month later. So that's when I realized this isn't just something that's happening to me. And it's also something that single people care about. They really want to talk about this and do something about it. And one thing that was interesting about that is I was just starting to think about these things. Well, at that point, I had no idea of how systematic the disadvantages were. I call it singleism, akin to sexism or racism. It's the
Right.
stereotyping, stigmatizing, discrimination against single people. I didn't realize that in the United States and many other countries, the advantaging of married people is written right into hundreds of laws. It was
Really?
amazing. I was just aware of the everyday stuff.
Do you have any example of some of the laws that stick out that are like that?
Yeah, in the United States, we have Social Security, so that's our pension, when you
Hmm.
retire or grow old. And let's say I work side by side with a married person, same number of years. Maybe I do even better work than than my married
Right.
colleague. But when I when my married colleague dies, he can give or she can give their social security to their spouse. But I can't give mine to anyone, even though I paid the same into it, and no one can give their social security benefits to me. So that's a really huge one.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
a bit of a scam.
Yeah, really.
Right.
And there are lots of others, like access to affordable health care is easier if you're married. Your boss or employer might put you on, let your spouse access your plan at a reduced rate, whereas I can't, say, put on a close friend or, a dear relative. It's like,
Interesting. Well, I've spoken to people about the idea of living in a pro-natalist country where the
yeah.
idea of having kids and being married is kind of
Hmm.
is put into the fabric. Like I think people can argue
Right.
it's a religious sort of ideal, or people can argue it's
Hmm.
just part of the government wanting to have more people to sustain itself and grow
Yeah.
and all of these things.
Yeah.
And because when I was preparing for this interview, when I look at the topic and why more people seem to be choosing this path, it's funny because I think, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this, is that I see it similarly to how I look at why more people are coming out as gay in the Western world than ever before. And I think it's because now they have the option to, where before there were
Yes.
so many societal disincentives to do so. So in the past, women
Right.
definitely didn't have the option to be single by choice. You were a social
Mhm.
pariah, a trollop, a tramp, a hussy, all of these things, and
Yes.
now the options to women choosing to be single can be quite varied and fulfilling. Like the life around being
Yes.
single is very different. So I imagine women are by and large leading the charge on this sort of marital revolution. What do you think of that assessment?
Yes, in general, I think they are. Although, when you look at the single at heart, and let me take a minute to say what that is. But when you look at them, men are at least as likely to be single at heart. So, single at heart are people, and I'm one of them, who love being single and want to stay single. Single life is our best life, our most joyful, fulfilling, and meaningful life. We are happy and flourishing because we're single, not in spite of it. And and what you said about it being more doable to be single, for women especially, that's certainly true. So, for example, as women have access over the decades to more kinds of jobs, more better paying jobs, they can support themselves and maybe even some kids. So they're not
Right,
economically tethered to a husband for life support, economic life support, they can support themselves. And
right.
um,
Well, I
because,
like.
yeah,
So sorry, I was going to say I
no, go
like I
ahead.
like your perspective that you're so adamant that single life is our best life, and that's one of the reasons that I was
Yes.
so curious to talk to you, because
Right.
I try to stay in the middle on things as far as I try to understand these
Hmm.
sort of these polar opposite
Yeah.
views. And so,
Right.
because I've seen, friends be single, friends be, married
Uh-huh.
miserably, married happily,
Right.
and all of these things. And I've always said, like, to be in a marriage with someone that you're flourishing within, and there's an open
Hmm.
communication, and it's a good
Hmm.
partnership. Like, to
Right.
me, that sounds like the ideal. Whereas being in a relationship that is, toxic, or
Right.
a bit of an anchor to you, like,
Right.
I can't think of anything worse, but I think there's
Right.
also what the topic you're talking about, well, being single, is that, like, you can really flourish in a
Yes.
completely different way, even if it's with
Yes.
having um, short-term partners and lovers, and a
Yes.
plurality of friends, and all of these
Yes.
things. And
Exactly.
so, yeah, how do you see, maybe before we get into all the benefits that I'm sure you
Yeah.
have in your head
Hmm.
forever, where do you see perhaps some negatives of of the single life?
Oh, well, because most societies are geared toward couples. It's everything from the big laws that I just mentioned to you, the structural ways that institutions are set up to advantage couples, to the everyday advantages in the marketplace. For example, I'll maybe a couple pays in US currency $100, so it's $50 each for a culture of event or membership or insurance or travel or whatever it is. And then the single person pays $60. Well, I'm subsidizing couples. Why am I subsidizing married couples? Right? So there's things like that. And then there are things like in the workplace where people sort of assume that the single person can come in over the holidays because, they don't have a life and they can have last choice of when they go on vacation and
Wow.
all that kind of stuff. So yes, there are definitely disadvantages. And then there are the disadvantages. And I've documented this in my research of other people not believing that single people can be truly happy. So yeah, so they'll say things like, "Oh, you're just fooling yourself. You haven't met the right person. Once you do, you really will be happier." And my colleague Wendy Morris and I did these studies where we described people, and we called one of them single and one of them married, and they were described in identical ways. And different people saw the profiles of the single person and the married person.
Huh.
Um, and we described, like, where they were from and what they were interested in and what their job was. Those kinds of things. So it's identical. Then we asked, how happy do you think this person is, and how happy would they say they are? And they systematically say that single people will say that they're happier than they really are. So they're
Right.
saying they don't believe us. We say we're happy. They think, oh, you're just saying that.
Oh
So
my
that's
gosh,
pretty annoying.
that's so funny. Yeah, because I think these things kind of persist through the generations. Like, I can
Yes.
imagine in the 60s, 70s, yeah, I'm sure things changed a lot more in the 80s, but
Hmm. Yeah.
there seemed to just not, from my understanding of that
Uh-huh.
time in history, just not a lot to do because everybody was married. And so
Yes.
you couldn't even go anywhere.
Yes.
Travel was too expensive. Like, there
Hmm.
weren't a lot of restaurants, not a lot of things coming
Hmm.
up. But now, in this day and age, like,
Yeah.
again, I live in Barcelona, and there are plenty of people that are single in my age,
Yeah.
at the 40s. But
Yeah.
you can travel with your friends very, very easily. You can go to the beach. You can join a art
Yes.
class. You can join a dance class. Like, there is just so many things to do and to meet other people that
Hmm.
I think it is easier to flourish if you're. And I
Yes.
think it should increase the bar of why people should want to get married, because
Absolutely.
before, if being single was so isolative and
Hmm.
so miserable
Yes.
and boring, then, like, well, like, okay, I guess
Yeah.
having arguments with this person is
Yeah.
still better than this. But now I think we strive towards a really great collaborative relationships. And if that's not like that, well, then the option to be single is pretty great.
Yeah,
So
well, you know what? There's something that sounds like what you're saying that I hear a lot. People say, "Well, it's better to be single than to wish you were," or "It's better to be single than to be in a bad romantic relationship." But for people who are single at heart, people like me who are powerfully drawn to single life, single is better, period. I don't even want to be in a good romantic relationship or marriage. To me, the risk, and to other people who are single at heart, the risk isn't what we would miss if we did not organize our lives around a romantic partner. It would be what we would miss if we did.
that's tremendous. Let's dive a little deeper into that. So,
Yeah,
what do you think being and let's use an idealized marital
yeah,
relationship.
yeah,
You guys
sure.
get along really well. You support
Uh-huh.
each other to live independent
Right,
lives, but
right,
you happen to cohabitate.
right.
What do you think in that environment you would miss out on?
Um, I think my freedom to create my own life and have my solitude and be able to spend as much time as I want with as many different people as I want without thinking that some, partner is home thinking that time belongs to them. But what
Right.
what really persuaded me, and I worried about this, because I have never been in a long-term romantic relationship. So, what really persuaded me that single at heart is a thing, and it's not just that, we haven't met the right person or had the great experiences or whatever, is the people who told me their life stories, who did meet the one, the people who found someone they loved and who loved them. They have no complaints about their partner. But being married, being in a committed romantic relationship just didn't feel right. And there was one person, her name is Jennifer, whose story I told in Single at Heart. And she said her husband, or the person that wanted to marry her, kept saying, um, well, if we married, what are your reservations? And she would say, well, I want to travel. And he would say, well, we can travel. Even if we have kids, we can travel. And she said to me, but that's not what she wants. She wants to go off
Right.
on her own. And the kind of life he was describing didn't work. And other people told me they actually did marry and it didn't work out, and they kept thinking, well, it wasn't the right person, so they try someone
Right.
else, and then they try someone else. And one of the things I'm trying to do with my Single at Heart book and my other writings is to make people aware of the fact that some people really do flourish when they are single and they live a more fulfilling, meaningful life when they're single. And if they try to fit themselves into the married mold that they're expected to want and to crave and to cling to, it's just not going to work. Like one person said, it's kind of like having shoes that don't fit. They're never comfortable.
Oh man, some people just like being barefoot.
Yeah,
That's the thing.
exactly. That's a good,
That is
yeah.
really really interesting because
Uh-huh.
I've spoken to a lot of men and women recently. Some are recently divorced. Some are have never
Mm-hmm.
been married, and
Mm-hmm.
they've found always living with a partner quite frustrating. And
Hmm.
there's always an
Mm-hmm.
element, and these I guess aren't
Mm-hmm.
the vaulted relationships we're talking about that are
Right.
ideal, but in
Mm-hmm.
more like everyday normal relationships where
Yeah.
there's an element of control. Whereas if someone wants to take a trip with their girlfriends or a trip with
Mm-hmm.
their guy friends, the other one
Mm-hmm.
is thinking like, oh, why do they want to spend time away from me?
Yes.
Why do
Yes.
they, someone's afraid of someone else cheating, and there's this
Mm-hmm.
element of fear in
Yeah.
that, which is why I
Mm-hmm.
think more people are going towards open relationships now, where they
Yeah.
want that intimacy at home, but they
Uh-huh.
also want the ability to find other partners and go
Right.
like that. So I'm hearing a lot
Right.
of that from friends, and it's
Yes.
yeah, it's interesting. I think people are rethinking the entire dynamic of what a romantic
Yes.
relationship means. I mean, like you could have more casual, shorter
Mm-hmm.
term
Mm-hmm.
lovers and take trips and be intimate and
Right.
have that closeness. It doesn't have to be this guilt centered idea of like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, it's not married committed sex, so it's
Yeah.
cheapened, it's less, and like
Yeah.
I
No.
don't know. I think we're all
No.
rethinking what
Yes.
society could be. Is that what you're hearing from the people that you're interviewing as well?
Yes. Absolutely. In fact, there are some committed couples who insist that they are single at heart. And and what they tell me is that their lives have a lot of the elements that single people who are single at heart cherish. So they often are much more independent. So they don't have this tightly interconnected, enmeshed lives that some couples do. Some of them even live apart in places of their own, and
Mm,
they have more financial freedom. They keep their accounts separate and are not so controlling about who the other person spends time with and how much time. So, um, so yeah, I do see some of that. And what I love about that is that people want to claim the single at heart label, and I love
right,
that.
right. Yeah, because that is not a thing that is normally discussed. It's not
Right.
many people, if anyone, I've ever heard saying like, no, I just want to. Like most people that are saying, I just want to stay single, is
Uh-huh.
because they've had a series of horrific relationships or
Yes.
abuse and trauma and things like that, and
Right.
they're just conditioned to believe that any sort of romantic relationship will be disastrous. There's not a lot of people
Yeah.
that are just simply like, no, the relationships I've had have been okay,
Yeah.
but I would like this life of more freedom and with my friends and to explore. And I think,
Yeah. And
there's,
have time to yourself too.
yeah, like not too long ago, I spoke with a financial expert that specializes with people that are child free
Oh,
in the
great.
U.S. And because they say a lot
Uh-huh.
of questions people get are, well, aren't you concerned on who will take care of you when you're older?
Yeah.
And he cited a stat that said only 1 to 2% of children take care of their parents. So
Yeah.
that idea, if that's why
Right.
you're having kids, it's completely
Uh-huh.
bankrupt.
Uh-huh. And when you're single at heart and you are embracing your single life and you're not creating around a life around the expectation that someone's going to be there for you, you can take the necessary steps to be better prepared. And some
Huh.
studies show that people who have stayed single do better in later life than people who were um, previously married, so the divorced or the widowed. And
Right.
in part, that's because they've learned how to do things. And so, for example, there's something that is an advantage for married couples while they're married, which is that each person doesn't have to do everything. They can split the chores, right? Now, of course,
Right.
there'll be big conflicts over who's not doing their fair share. But nonetheless,
Right.
each person doesn't have to do everything. But then, when the marriage ends by divorce or widowhood, the people are left not knowing how to do half of the tasks or being out of practice. And to have that happen at such a difficult time, like when you're first divorced or first widowed, can be really difficult. And meanwhile, the people who have been single for a long time, especially the single at heart who have invested in their single lives, they already either know how to do all those things or they figured out how to find people to hire or to help.
Right. Well, I'd like to examine one idea as well, because there's this idea that because they say women have these second shifts in the home and women will do a lot of
Mm-hmm.
housework and a lot of these things and the
Oh,
cooking and all
yes.
that stuff. So that's
Mm-hmm.
obviously an incentive for more women to want to be independent and not to do double the housework. And so I
Correct.
think a lot of people, and that's completely justified. And so
Yeah.
I think a lot of people think that men would have a harder time being single. But I've spoken to a fair amount of women that after they've gotten divorced or ended like
Uh-huh.
long-term relationships that were 10 years or so out
Uh-huh.
of even out of university, that they have this intense fear of being alone, and they have no idea how
Right.
to make decisions outside of that
Mm-hmm.
relationship, because every decision they made has been on behalf of a
Yeah.
family unit, on behalf of a coupled
Right.
unit, and because of the husband. And so now that they
Mm-hmm.
have to make decisions for themselves, there's this transition period of a couple years that it's like,
Mm-hmm.
how do I live on my own? And they said they've gone through a fair amount of panic. So I just wanted to make the
Right.
point that like both sexes,
Mm-hmm.
both genders have some trouble being single when they haven't been single their whole lives. So I think that speaks to your point that some
Mm-hmm.
people, when they're single, they have to learn how to do these things on their own,
Yes.
because there is no
Yes.
fallback person to
Yeah.
do them.
And you know what's really interesting about becoming single again, or another example during the pandemic, when some, during lockdown, when some people were on their own for the first time. And at first, of course, it was, weird and maybe scary, but some people found that eventually they actually liked having more time to themselves.
Right.
And I hear the same sort of stories from people who are widowed or divorced. Which is that at first, especially if you had a great relationship for a while or a long lasting one, it can be just devastating and so painful when that marriage ends. But
Mm,
after a while, and it can be scary at first in the ways that you just described, of not knowing how to be alone, not knowing how to do things.
right.
Um, but then after a while, some people, not all of them, but some realize, oh, wow, I like this. It's kind of like they discover who they really are. Because even if you're with someone who's not at all controlling, you're still influenced by that person's wishes and desires and needs. And once you can decide for yourself about everything from the small decisions of everyday life, what to eat, when to sleep, what temperature to keep the house at, to the financial decisions, what to
Right.
spend and what to save, to the big life altering decisions like moving across the country or to another country, or leaving a job that you trained for and doing something more meaningful.
Right.
Once you get to have those decisions to yourself, you have the chance to get to know who you really are and live authentically.
That's a really beautiful way to put it, because it seems like there, as we're alluding to, there's a bit of learned helplessness that's kind of built in sometimes to these relationships, especially if you
Right.
married young. So you went from
Mm-hmm.
high school to maybe university and then
Right.
right into a
Right.
relationship. You're always looking either to this interdependency. Like, I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
say codependency, because that's kind of a
Right.
negative connotation, but
Mm-hmm.
just an interdependency where you've divided household tasks and with
Mm-hmm.
children, and you
Mm-hmm.
depend on each other to do these things,
Right.
that at some level, when you become single, you have to
Mm-hmm.
rearrange your whole life in your head, and
Mm-hmm.
that becomes just like this cognitive load to
Yeah.
try to understand. I mean,
Right.
I've had friends who were married since or they've been in a relationship since university,
Uh-huh.
and they're reaching their 40s now and things are great,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden, this happened recently. I know someone who had a death in the family, and it really shook their foundation, and
Mm-hmm.
they've changed their whole life, because they were
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, there maybe the sense of their own mortality kicked in,
Yes.
and they realized they had been in this interdependent relationship and it
Mm-hmm.
was good, but they
Mm-hmm.
realized that there was more to life that they wanted to
Yeah.
discover, and so they ended their
Mm-hmm.
marriage, and they're going out
Yeah.
on their own. So it
Yeah.
maybe it's kind of this idea that we think we should do these things. I should get married. I should
Mm-hmm.
have children. I
Yes.
should.
Yes.
Especially, we were talking before this that you and I both come from Italian heritage,
Yeah.
and there's so much of that
There is.
guilt, control, and
Yeah.
judgment that is just baked into the
Yeah.
culture for all the
Yeah.
amazing things that's baked into the
Mm-hmm.
culture. And so I think, especially in these more maybe Catholic sort of families, communities, that the idea of family and children is so like, you
Oh yeah.
must do this.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen that as well?
Yes. In my personal experience, I thought that that I was very fortunate because my mother never pressured me to marry. She never gave me a hard time about being single, not
Me
even
too.
subtly. So I was really happy about that. I thought it meant she understood that I had a life that I loved. But then, the first time she ever brought up my single status was the last conversation I had alone with her as she lay dying. And she said, I worry about you, referring to me being single. And I was just heartbroken. I had no idea
Right.
she was worried about me for being single. And I wish, I wish I had already written single at heart because I would like not just the single people to be validated, but I would like all the parents out there who are worried about their single kids to think again. I mean, maybe some
Right.
of them really do want to be married and it's an issue,
Hmm.
but there are others who maybe are thriving. And if they were pushed into marriage, it's pushing them into a life that doesn't fit.
Right. Yeah, I've been really playing with this idea of acceptance over the last little while now, of
Mm-hmm.
like accepting what is opposed to what we think should be.
Mm-hmm.
And just like people who maybe grew up without a mother or a father,
Mm-hmm.
maybe they romanticize their lives about
Yeah.
what it might mean to have that person growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to think of, yeah, but let's say your parental figure didn't pass away, maybe they would have been terrible.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
we never
Yes, of
think of that,
course.
of that side of it.
Yes.
And I think maybe
Yeah.
that's part of it, what you're saying, and that some people who are single, who really want to be married, I think we
Mm-hmm.
romanticize the idea, even
Yes.
amongst like half of marriages end. We know so many people
Right.
that are married into their 60s that are kind of
Yeah.
miserable, and you're like,
Yeah.
you two should probably be divorced. And
Yeah.
so like,
Yeah.
we don't think about that, instead trying to accept where we
Mm-hmm.
are and make our lives as
Yeah.
fulfilling and fun and
Yes.
filled with friends
Yeah.
as we can. Instead, I know people that will, and I get to moments like this where
Yeah.
I'll have a little wallow, being like, it would be really great to meet someone that is a good match. Meanwhile, I think of like how wonderful my life is being single with all the people
Yeah.
I've met and the life
Yeah.
I've created. So yeah, I think it's really complicated because it's built into culture and everything.
Yes.
And so what would you say to people who are kind of, I don't know, on the fence with their status and wishing that they were married, and feel like, how would you counsel people that are that like that?
Well, first, I would say um, beware of what I call in my Single at Heart book the magical, mythical, romantic partner. And often when people, pine after a romantic partner and wish they were coupled or wish they were married, what they have in mind is this person, this magical, mythical, romantic partner who's always attentive, always there when you need them, always wants the same amount and kind of sex that you do at the same
Right,
time that you do, is great in bed, never strays. It's the person in later life who's always there when you've fallen and can't get up, and they're the
right.
ones who are never sick themselves and never sick of you.
That is amazing. That whole, is that exact passage in the book, or is that just
Not
off the
that
top of your
exact
head?
passage, but
Well, if you
that
ever do an
idea.
update, I think you should toss that in there, because you're
Thank
right.
you.
It romanticizes every
Yes.
single level of
Yes.
coupledom. There's no room
Yes.
for gray area. There's no even
Yeah.
room for the other person's individuation.
Yes.
They're just there to be exactly what you
Mm-hmm.
want. And I think we all
Yeah.
make. Oh, there was actually a study that came out. not too long ago, I think, that says every person in a relationship slowly tries to turn the person that they're into the person that they want them to be.
Yes,
Right.
right.
And so
Yes.
that in general, if that's just how
Uh-huh.
we operate,
Yeah.
then in general, that's going to be a reduction in someone's freedom and sense of self.
Right.
And so unless
Right.
we start teaching kids, and I think we should start teaching kids in elementary school and continue into high school about what our emotions are like in a relationship, how to
Yes.
exist in a relationship. When everyone is ready to get married, instead of going to the church to have an unmarried priest tell you how to live your life in a marriage, which is,
Yeah.
it's one of the funniest things of all
It
time for me.
is. It
But like,
is.
you should actually be sent to a couples counselor to assess what your relationship is like, and
Mm-hmm.
then say, okay, if you're going to get married, these are the things you need to start working on now so you can flourish. Instead, we just throw
Yeah.
people in the deep end at 25
Mm-hmm.
years old and
Yeah.
say, go live the rest of your life
Mm-hmm.
and raise more humans. And it's kind
Yeah.
of absurd.
Yeah. And you know what else we should be teaching people from very early on is that single life is a totally respectable life to choose. And we should teach the skills to be on your own, to appreciate solitude. You know, parents and teachers and other people are so worried when
Mm,
kids don't spend enough time with other kids, you know, when they're in their own space. And for some, if they're being ostracized, that's a big problem. But
right.
some are really happy. You know, they can play by themselves and be entertained and not need to be with other kids. And that should be seen as a strength, not something to worry about.
Right. I like that. Is there, what sort of societal evolution do you think we need to have to account not just for a growing subset of single people that are choosing to be single,
Mm-hmm.
but also for children that are being raised by people that are either single or divorced? And like,
Right.
do you have any ideas for how we can kind of change how we gather and live?
Sure. And I like the way you put it because I'm most interested in single people, but I see what I'm doing as part of the bigger project
Hmm,
of making it more possible for more people to live authentically. And
right.
so, with regard to people who are not heterosexual, a lot of progress has been made with more openness and positivity, and also consider the place of women. There's been great progress in getting past the stereotypes and having more possibilities for how to live as a woman without being stuck in a certain role. And we've been behind in how single people can live because it's still seen as, oh, you know, you poor thing, and your life isn't as good as those awesome married people. and and so I think whatever we can do to let people be their best selves, live the lives that are true to themselves, and let them flourish, that's what we should be doing.
I really like that because even during this conversation and preparing for this call, I've been thinking of all the people I know that are in marriages, and the
Mm-hmm.
ones that are relationally better and the ones that are
Mm-hmm.
relationship poor. And I've seen even the ones that are in good relationships. I notice there's always this push and pull for what everyone wants because it
Mm-hmm.
is a life of compromise, for better or for worse. And I know
Mm-hmm.
people that have had a couple more kids than they would want to have because
Mm-hmm.
one person wants to have it and one doesn't, and that
That's a
changes the
huge
relationship.
thing.
We probably do a whole nother hour
Right.
on that topic. But
Mm-hmm.
there's all of these things that we don't have built in, and if you have
Mm-hmm.
this love for this person and you
Yeah.
don't want to keep to authentically what you believe in, you end
Mm-hmm.
up giving in, and then you end up living a fundamentally different life, and sometimes that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't turn out the way you want because you didn't
Mm-hmm.
want it in the first place.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
I think that's also part of the equation, that if there's a couple
Yes.
that already has a kid and
Mm-hmm.
one of them wants another one and the other one doesn't, that
Mm-hmm.
if we accept the situation in both people's autonomy, then there, it would be nice if there was a way that someone could go have another child. But
Mm-hmm.
then
Mm-hmm.
that's why these relationships are so complicated
Yeah.
in negotiating, because we
Mm-hmm.
have so much love baked into them,
Mm-hmm.
and so as the fear of losing that
Yes.
love. Does that make sense?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So I guess, are you speaking, like, in your book? Have you spoken to some of the younger generations as well, and how they're
Oh, yeah.
thinking, and how they're thinking about this?
Yes. And I think that's important because what I hear from older people is so many of them got married because it was just what they were supposed to do, what they were expected to do, that they
Totally.
never seriously considered whether they wanted to be married. It was not something you thought about. So, what I'm hoping is that what I'm saying in Single at Heart and other writings is to make it more known that marriage, romantic relationships, it's a choice. It's not an obligation. And I think that if that idea becomes more widely known and accepted, of course it will be good for single people because we'll be less stigmatized, but it will also be good for people who want to be romantically coupled and want to be married because they will be approaching it from a position of strength as something they want. It's what
Right.
it's something they really want rather than running away from a stigmatized single life.
Right. Yeah, that speaks to a lot of truths that I've experienced with myself and with friends. Like,
Yeah.
even I was at a dinner on Wednesday evening from a company called Time Left, and it's
Mm-hmm.
basically dinner with strangers.
Oh,
And
I
so
love that.
you sign up and you put
Yeah.
like, some of your demographics for who you are,
Uh-huh.
and if you're single, or how old you are,
Yeah.
and so they put you in similar age groups,
Uh-huh.
and then you show up and you just meet people and you hang out, and afterwards you rate the dinner and who you'd like to see at a dinner again or not,
That's
for the
wonderful. I
next time.
love that. What's
Yeah,
it called again?
it's called timeleft.com.
Oh, okay.
And so they're all over the states, and
Yeah.
in Europe. So they might be in California. And
Huh.
it was interesting because there's a whole lot of dates or dinners going on
Uh-huh.
during that evening. And
Mm-hmm.
after the dinner, you're all invited to a bar nearby. And
Ah,
so
okay.
everyone that was at all the other dinners can hang out and
Oh,
mingle. And it
I
was
see.
super cool because it was
Yeah.
just like, it's not a dating
Yeah.
site. You're just meant to
Right.
hang out with people and have good conversations, hopefully.
Yes.
but
Yes.
like but these are ideas that I think are going to start to be built into the social fabric of cities in our lives,
Yeah.
as
I
more
hope
people
so.
start to realize, like, oh, you know what, I want to be single.
Uh-huh.
I don't want to have this partnered life that
Mm-hmm.
for some people maybe feels a bit stifling. And I would say for men and
Mm-hmm.
women equally
Mm-hmm.
have these frustrations. And
Right.
yeah, so where do you think, I guess, the future of this movement goes? Like, what trends are you seeing happening?
I would love to see more of what you just described because I think what a lot of single people crave is more possibilities for building friendships
Right.
because society is so focused on couples and romantic couples and organized by the couple. Often dinner parties, in contrast to what you just described, are dinner parties of couples.
Right.
So that would be one. But I think that as the number of single people grows, and it has been growing all around the world, and even people who eventually marry are getting to it at older and older ages. So as
Hmm.
there are more single people, then I think things basically do get better because it first of all, it normalizes being single because it really is normal. When in the United States, for example, close to half of the population of 18 and older are not married. So when you have millions of people who are not married, it's hard to insist that there's something wrong with all of them, right?
Right.
So that's one thing. So another is, as more people are single, it kind of puts the pressure on society to catch up. So to have more affordable and appropriate housing, to make more uh, groceries available in smaller sizes, and like that sort of thing. But as there as the number of single people grows, especially the number of people who are happily single, that also creates backlash. So in the United States, we are getting a lot of these like books and editorials saying,
Oh man.
oh, it's marriage and nothing is important. And, don't think your career is where it's at. It's really marriage. And you have to have two parents to raise your kids, and single parents just aren't good enough. Suck it up.
Oh man, that's the big one of how like
Yeah,
how much we're missing fathers and how we need a family
right.
unit and all of these things. But
Yeah,
again,
yeah.
this romanticizes this idea of the
Yes.
family unit. Like it's like we're
Yeah.
ignoring everything that we know about the 50s, 60s, and 70s of these alcoholic fathers of
Right.
like women that are just completely
Yeah.
disconnected from their
Yeah.
families because they want to be out in
Right.
more vibrant parts of the
Uh-huh.
workforce. Like there's just
Uh-huh.
so much evidence we have to say that the
Hmm.
family unit, if it works, great. For
Yeah.
those people that it works for, amazing. But there
Right.
are so many examples of people who just don't want to be mothers or fathers, who
Hmm.
just want to, or it
Yeah.
didn't happen for whatever reason. And yeah,
Right.
I'm equally sick of those editorials because
Yeah.
I think they all come from a very disingenuous place. I think they all come
Yeah.
from a very
Hmm.
religious,
Hmm.
soaked culture
Hmm.
that we think we
Hmm.
have to be like this, which I think is
Right.
kind of silly because if we think of like Homo sapiens, like it's not evolutionarily normal to think that we have to create a legal system to join two people to make
Hmm.
them financially
Hmm.
incentivized to
Hmm.
stay together. Like,
Hmm.
is there anything more unnatural than that?
Yeah.
And in that, I think it's still a
Hmm.
very noble pursuit. Like, I hope all my friends who are married or getting married stay happy and in love, and I wish that for everybody. But let's not pretend that that's the only way to find fulfillment in our lives. That's the tragedy of
Right.
this.
Or that the nuclear family unit is necessarily an ideal, what
Right.
um, multi-generational families
Hmm.
have been more prominent in other places and times, um, and I think going forward we will see more of these ways of living that aren't as closed as a lot of nuclear families are. So you see that, for example, um, in co-housing communities where everybody has their own house or apartment. And in each house or apartment, there could be whatever you see anywhere else, one person or a family or just a couple or whatever permutation. But
Right.
then they live in a deliberate community where they share some meals together, they govern together, they have a geographical setup where they're more likely to run into each other in their everyday lives. And
Right.
so it's a way of having both autonomy of a place of your own and community, and
Hmm.
that see other people on a daily basis. And I think that we're going to see more of those kinds of innovations in living.
I would love to see that because they say that
Mhm.
a lot of the reason why men and women have less friends in the modern era now is because we're putting too much pressure on the family unit. And so, and also because the kids are so expensive that the parents feel like they need to
Yeah.
spend any more time with
Right.
their kids for all the money that they're spending on it. And I think we're losing this village of family that we used to have. I mean, I grew up, I was basically the first grandchild of the immigrant generation. And so I grew up around really a village of people that I looked at, different men and
Yes.
women, for how to live our lives. And I'm in the middle of trying to write a book myself right now, and there's a section I'm writing called A Village of Fathers, because to your
Yes.
point, you're saying that everyone's saying, oh, you have to be in a dual parent household to
Yeah.
be properly raised, etc. And my point is that, like, my evolution as a human being, as a man, it didn't just come from my parents. It came from my grandfather, my uncle, from
Yes.
all the friends that I met along the
Right.
way that were living life in a way that I was like, oh, I really like that. I love that one friend I met in my early 20s. He used to hug all of his close friends, and I'm like,
Love
oh, I
that.
don't do that. I want to do that.
Yeah,
That
I
looks
love
great.
that.
And then I
Yeah.
integrated that into my life. So I don't think we need to put as much, like, obviously parents are super important, but
Right.
if we have this village of plurality of everyone trying to help everyone else live better
Yes.
lives, I think
Yes.
we would all be better off.
And I have the same experience growing up. You know, as I said, I'm 70. So my parents and grandparents, they did not have this attitude that you see in so many couples today. Not all of them. What I call, or other people call, intensive coupling, where
Right.
you look to your partner to be your everything.
Right.
And if you want to spend time with like friends or relatives, that could be perceived as a threat by your partner. Like, why don't you want to spend all your time with me? And it wasn't like that for my parents or grandparents. My mom had sisters and brothers. She loved spending time with them, and she would without my dad. And my dad had his friends, and I think that was healthy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of books coming out about friendship that I'm reading about
Yes,
for my research,
right.
and it's just so important for us to have. They say friendships are the most important relationships that we have in our lives, because it's the only one that doesn't have these grand expectations. You know, in family, there's some
Yeah,
of that built in a
right.
relationship. Obviously, there's that fear of
Yeah,
love that this is going to disappear. They're going to cheat,
right.
like all of
Yeah,
these things.
right.
And with friendships, these are things that we choose. That, like, if one isn't
Yes.
serving us anymore, then perhaps we can let that relationship go, or we can just separate ourselves a little bit from it. And it's so important that I think that's maybe one of the biggest ingredients that we could add to, have people that are single at heart flourish even more, or have more people
Absolutely.
decide that they can start, because
Yes.
they have friends and activities and things that
Right.
doesn't make a romantic relationship the be all end all of human civilization.
Yes. And you know that we could value friends um, on a day-to-day basis in the way that you just described, but we could
Yes.
also incorporate it into policies. So, for example, um, sometimes in the United States, the workplaces will allow a married person to take time off. Of course, if their spouse dies, well, that's understandable. But they it's not the same for a single person who has a very close friend or a special relative. It's like,
Right.
oh well, that's just a friend. And
Right.
and so I think that if we valued friends more, both on an everyday basis, but also in our policies and laws, that would be good for all of us.
I love that. I think that's probably a good place to wrap up. And
Okay.
but Bella, where can people find you, and where can they find Single at Heart, and so they can get more of a taste of
Right.
your wisdom?
Okay, so you can find my website. It's my name, belladepaulo.com, or just Google Single at Heart and I will come up. I hope my website will too.
Okay.
I don't know how widely available Single at Heart is in Europe yet. I was on a show in Canada just a few days ago, and it sold out on Amazon Canada in 2 days. Yes, I was
Amazing. I mean, well, I think
delighted.
since we're in English, most
Yes.
people that see this are going to be either in Canada or the US or the
Oh,
UK.
great.
So
Oh,
if you
great.
can hold up
Okay.
the book again, I'm going to read the
I
byline as
will.
well. So
Thank
it's Single
you.
at Heart, the Power, Freedom, and Heart-Filling Joy of Single Life. Bella
Correct.
DePaulo, thank you so much for being here. I've really enjoyed
Thank
this.
you for having me. I enjoyed it too.
So thanks for listening to No More, No Less. I appreciate the time you spent with me today. So please subscribe and rate the show if you enjoyed it. It'll help me create more amazing content and get that next little bit of validation that I so deeply crave. If you did enjoy it, well, that sucks. But to make sure, I think you should listen to my next 10 episodes and then decide. I mean, come on. Rome was not built in a day. I'm just getting warmed up here, guys. So thanks again. See you next time.